It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and Joe Dolan.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eatin' podcast, and it is, of course, presented by our friends over at DraftKings. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman. Most of you know that. 5 teams, 7 years, classic journeyman. But thank goodness I had that journey because it enabled me to get these CBS and Westwood One broadcasting gigs. I'll be on the sideline Sunday for Chiefs, Ravens. Haven't decided what I'm wearing yet. I think it's going to rain, so I'm likely going to go with my big orange jacket, which is key to trying to get as much TV time as I possibly can. I got at least 3 good snippets in that Rams-Lions Sunday night football game a couple weeks ago. We'll see what I can get done this week. At Ross Tucker NFL on social, by the way, if you see me, it's just a little game I play. It's just, I just amuse myself, okay? At Ross Tucker Pod is the handle for all of our podcasts. We, of course, did the college draft on Monday, which is awesome because that was sort of the scouting takeaways from the divisional round, which I highly encourage you guys to check out. Even Money podcast, always fantastic. We did have a best bet between Steve and I on the Sunday AFC Championship game. So listen or watch the Even Money betting podcast at youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Some good guests so far this week on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast as well. Sheil Kapadia on Tuesday talking about, the 11 rules he has for hiring a head coach. Mike Mayock today, the former Raiders GM, had some really interesting things to say about his time with the Raiders and being a GM and Mad Max Crosby. I think people will really enjoy, especially Raiders fans. This show is all about Joe Dolan, at FG_Dolan on social media. He is one of the owners over at fantasypoints.com, where you can still and always get in on their incredible content simply by going to fantasypoints.com. Make sure you use the code 24feast so you actually get the discount. 24feast at fantasypoints.com. Again, at FG_Dolan. Joe, we got a couple games to dive into, but I do like to get your takeaways from other things going on around the league, such as, let's just start with the divisional round games and what fantasy takeaways we need to have from that Texans-Ravens game moving forward from those two teams.
Yeah, so obviously the Texans, when you think about it, Ross, I know a second-round playoff loss for most franchises isn't, all that notable. But when you think about the Houston Texans and think about the history of the franchise and think about the circumstances surrounding the last few years for that team, Deshaun Watson essentially decides he's never going to play for them again, and then obviously has the off-field issue with the sexual assault allegations, so they have to trade him. They have multiple first-year coaches come and go. They win miraculously on the final day of the 2022 season to move from the first pick to the second pick. All these things that happen that appear to be negatives for that franchise lead to the hiring of DeMeco Ryans, the drafting of C.J. Stroud instead of Bryce Young, and then they trade for Will Anderson, which at the time I thought looked a little pricey. Well, they make the playoffs. They go down in the second round to a team that's a favorite to win the Super Bowl right now. Obviously, there's only 4 teams left. I mean, when you think about it, and ask any Texan fan, within the context of this season and what the expectations were, we just saw the greatest season in Texans history. They've never made the AFC Championship game, so they've never been further than they are right now. And they did this with a rookie quarterback. They did this with a fledgling connection between CJ Stroud and Nico Collins. They did this with a running back in Devin Singletary, who I don't think they expected, a whole lot out of. And we have to talk about their run game, because I think that's an area where they need to improve this offseason. I think they'll probably be in the market for either signing or drafting a back. But the Texans just had the greatest season in the history of the franchise, and this is going to be a team we're going to be extremely excited about for fantasy football purposes next year. And as soon as drafts open up, you're going to see guys like Nico Collins going in the early rounds. CJ Stroud is going to be one of the first quarterbacks off the board. He will easily be drafted as a starting quarterback, especially since I think they're going to help him this offseason. We'll see what happens with Tank Dell and his recovery, but there is going to be a lot of buzz and a lot of justified buzz for this Texan offense. Of course, we do have to take into account Bobby Slowick is going to be a hot head coaching candidate, and we'll talk about some of the coaching candidates who have been hired and some who have been fired so far. But you would think that Bobby Slowick leaving could maybe stunt the development of CJ Stroud, but this is a team that really fans should be excited about for the future. They're young, they're talented, they play hard. We just saw the greatest season in Texans history.
Well, that's a good point, Joe, and a good call. I can tell you right now, I don't know when people start doing best ball. We do DraftKings best ball when that comes out over the summer. I love it. I know there's some others that come out before it. Mm-hmm. I will be taking a lot of Dameon Pierce because he's going to get traded somewhere where they're going to use him a lot. Yeah. And he might be even like a bell cow running back somewhere else. You get a guy 2 years left on his rookie contract, making the league minimum, that has a lot of tread left on the tires because he didn't get the ball much this year. But you saw as a rookie what he can do on a terrible, terrible football team. I'm telling you right now, Joe, I'll be taking Dameon Pierce in a lot of these leagues. I'm excited to see where he ends up next year. What about the Packers? We're really just talking about the losing teams because we'll get to the winning teams as we break down the conference championship games. But what about the Packers who, man, if there's one team that was the closest to winning that lost this last weekend, it was the Packers. There's like 6 different things I could name that cost them that game. I thought they were the better team in that game.
They sure were.
But they ended up ultimately losing. And unfortunately, Purdy was bad until the very end when he was good. And Love was good until the fourth quarter when he was bad.
And Jordan Love, as well as he had played, I mean, he has to be sitting still, like waking up in the morning and being like, dude, saying to himself, what the F were you thinking? Like on that final, what did they need? 20 yards to have it? I know Anders Carlson isn't exactly the most reliable kicker in the world, and I know some fans who have fallen in love with Jordan Love, as well they should have over the last couple months, are much rather blaming that game on Anders Carlson than they are on Jordan Love, and fair or not. But Jordan Love, what do they need? 20 yards, 1st and 10, he throws across his body. I mean, look, it can't happen. He'll learn from it. Green Bay this offseason, the question now becomes, I don't think they need to make a move at wide receiver. They have so much talent, but the question now becomes for Green Bay, how much can they trust Christian Watson next year? Because obviously he's a supreme talent who simply cannot stay on the field, and that's clearly a problem for them. Aaron Jones is under contract for next year. I think A.J. Dillon, he's a free agent. They're going to move on from him. He gave them less this year than he's ever given them before. So Aaron Jones, I think at age 30, they're probably going to bring in, I don't know about competition, but they're going to bring in maybe an heir apparent or a veteran backup for him. A.J. Dillon, I think, is gone. So I think the Packers are going to justifiably sit here and say, hey, guys, let's run it back. Let's run it back on offense. Maybe make some moves on the offensive line. They've obviously had some injuries there, but it's a very good offensive line. That's what I think the Packers are going to end up doing. I think they're going to run it back. The question is going to be, who are the receivers we're going to draft earlier? I think Jaden Reed is probably going to be the first receiver we're going to take off the board from them. But Watson, obviously is the most gifted of those guys. Bo Melton gave him some great snaps at the end of the year. Romeo Doubs has had his moments, especially in the playoffs in the first 2 years of his NFL career. So I'm really interested to see what the Packers choose to do, but I would venture to guess that outside of adding some depth pieces, I think they're going to head into 2024 with a similar looking offense around Jordan Love.
I would agree. Let's talk Bucks, Joe, because speaking of free agents, Mike Evans a free agent, Baker Mayfield's a free agent. The Bucks have a lot of questions. They started to play pretty well offensively, and now they got a lot of questions.
Yeah, so, Ross, this is my question to you. We know there's 32 quarterback jobs in the NFL, and ideally, there's probably like 18 guys who you're like, yeah, I feel really good about that. If that, maybe it's less on a bad day. I think Baker played well enough to be the quarterback for the Buccaneers, but is the Buccaneers, obviously, look, a couple years ago, they went out and got Tom Brady. There's no Tom Brady available this offseason, but the Buccaneers are always looking to upgrade at that position, as most teams are, if they think an upgrade's possible. But, Ross, do you think Baker's back? Because I kind of feel like his fire, his leadership, I think he's probably earned it. I think he'll probably get a short-term deal, something that's easy for the Buccaneers to get out of. But I feel like Baker's going to be back. Do you?
I do, because what's their alternative?
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, they're not drafting high. Is it trade for Justin Fields? Like, why would you give up draft picks for someone that's not as good?
Yeah, and it just depends on if you think you can harness the Justin Fields skill set, right? Like, oh, he's obviously more physically gifted than Baker, and they can run a different offense. But I feel like Baker's going to be back. Mike Evans, I wonder how pissed off he is that they didn't give him an extension. I had heard tale that the Buccaneers actually kind of use that as a motivating tactic. Like, they love when Mike Evans plays pissed off. He also dropped some passes at the end of the year. You know, he had only 3 catches against the Eagles in the wild card round. He had a couple of long gains that were hit him in the hands that he just dropped. He also dropped a couple of passes against Detroit as well. But look, any team looking for a wide receiver is going to be in the mix for Mike Evans. I wouldn't be surprised if he's back with the Buccaneers, but that's the big question for that team this offseason. Quarterback and wide receiver. Baker, I think, is more likely to be back than Evans. That's just my gut feeling. Maybe a Buccaneers reporter would tell me I'm an idiot.
Whether you're hosting game day or movie night, Joe, DiGiorno knows that planning a watch party on a budget isn't easy. You need the perfect setting, perfect squad, perfect eats. Luckily, you're a game time mastermind. And you know that grabbing DiGiorno Classic Crust Pizza can bring home a dub because it's packed with half a pound of cheese, sauce, and other toppings and comes at an incredible price. Make the game-winning call and grab a DiGiorno Classic Crust Pizza from the grocery store today. It's not delivery, it's DiGiorno. Got to have something tasty to wash it down, Joe? That's Labatt Blue Light. I drink Labatt Blue Light. Jason Kelsey drinks Labatt Blue Light. Basically, every cool offensive lineman you know drinks Labatt Blue Light. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Last one, Joe, is just your thoughts on the Bills after that loss.
Whoever you're a fan of in the NFL, I mean, it could always be worse. I mean, it's got to be torture for Buffalo Bills fans. Absolute, utter torture. I feel terrible for them. Just another brutal loss. Josh Allen having to try to do it all himself. My question to you, Ross, you've seen this team up close. What the hell happened to Stephon Diggs? I mean, over the last 2 months, like, he's dropping passes that hit him in the hands from 60 yards downfield. Buffalo, Gabe Davis is a free agent. I think Buffalo needs to rebuild that wide receiver room. Shakir gave him some good snaps at the end of the year, but he's a 3. You know, like, is Diggs back? Does Buffalo trade him? We heard that he was discontented with their treatment of Chad Hall, the former wide receivers coach. And then at the end of the year, the guy was a ghost. And then when they needed him at the end of the year and Josh Allen's making darts down the field, he's dropping passes, that's a huge question for Buffalo this offseason. With Gabe Davis a free agent, Stephon Diggs dropping off over the last month plus of the season, the wide receiver position, to me, I feel they've obviously got the quarterback. I think they've got the running back. They invested a lot of money and picks into the tight end position with Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid. Wide receiver is the huge question for me for the Buffalo Bills. I don't think it's even close, Ross.
It's a really good point, and I think that I'll be curious to see what happens there. I think Diggs will still be there. I'd have to look at his cap stuff, but you wonder if they can spend money to get a better number 2, which I think would be helpful. Let's get into the AFC Championship, Joe.
Yeah.
I'll be on the sideline. I mentioned that earlier. It's the Chiefs. It's the Ravens. Ravens defense, really, really good. The Chiefs, somehow their offense is clicking more now, Joe, than it has all year.
Yeah, so, look, I mean, they're inevitable, right? The Kansas City Chiefs, and they haven't even, I don't know how. Look, they were efficient. Let's put it this way. Mahomes threw 23 passes for 215 yards. That's 9.3 yards per attempt. He had 2 touchdowns. It was just the second time all season that he averaged more than 8.8 yards per attempt in a game. C.J. Stroud, though, Baltimore really got after him. He had just 175 passing yards on 33 attempts, and he didn't lead a single touchdown drive. But Travis Kelce, as we've said, he was still a great fantasy tight end, but he wasn't Kelce. He was Kelce against Buffalo. Mahomes and Kelce set the record for most touchdowns, ahead of Gronkowski and Tom Brady for the most playoff touchdowns together. Baltimore, though, this is maybe where Kelce comes in. Baltimore has allowed 4+ receptions to individual tight ends in 7 of their last 8 games when their starters played, including 5 catches to Dalton Schultz last week. Rashee Rice had his worst game in a while, but again, Mahomes had just 25 dropbacks against Buffalo, and Isaiah Pacheco has been exceptional in a bell cow role of lately. The Ravens allowed the 6th most adjusted yards before contact per rush attempt on non-scramble runs during the regular season, but they really held Devin Singletary in check last week. I think the Chiefs' run game with Isaiah Pacheco is a different beast, though, than Houston's with Devin Singletary.
Interesting. What about Baltimore on offense? Obviously, Lamar with his legs, and after what Josh Allen did to the Chiefs, be curious to see if Willie Gay is healthy and can be the spy that has had success in that role.
Yeah, Josh Allen, 12 carries for 72 yards and 2 touchdowns last week. Lamar Jackson, the first player ever to have 2 passing touchdowns, 2 rushing touchdowns, 100 or more rushing yards, and a passer rating of 100 in any game. So Lamar Jackson, by those metrics, just played the best game of his career last week. The MVP is playing at a super high level. Kansas City had a lot of trouble with Josh Allen last week. And I mean, I don't know. I'm never going to sit here and say, is it good that a team doesn't have great players? But, Baltimore, their lack of a number 1 receiver on the perimeter, their lack of a guy like Stephon Diggs, regardless of what we just said about Stephon Diggs, their lack of a guy like that kind of neutralizes the impact of L'Jarius Sneed a little bit, because Baltimore doesn't have a go-to perimeter guy. Baltimore mixes the ball around to their receivers, to Zay Flowers and Aguilar and Isaiah Likely, and Mark Andrews could be back this week. So all of a sudden, Baltimore is now becoming deeper and more difficult to defend over the middle of the field. Obviously, the leading receiver last week for Buffalo was Dalton Kincaid in that game. Khalil Shakir was second in receiving in that game. So over the middle of the field is where Kansas City struggled to defend. It'll be really interesting if Mark Andrews is back, how many 2 tight end sets the Baltimore Ravens throw out there, because Isaiah Likely's been really good for them. He only had 2 catches last week against Houston, but he had a touchdown. So they're going to be able to work the middle of the field where Lamar really likes to throw the football. They're going to avoid L'Jarius Sneed on the perimeter. Really interested to see what their plan of attack is. But Lamar should have success on the ground running the football in this matchup.
Yeah, and the Chiefs are pretty beat up. I mean, they had guys, Chamari Connors out there playing, leading them in tackles. Josh Williams is out there. I don't know if Mike Edwards, their number 3 safety, will be able to get back for this game or not in the concussion protocol. Let's move on, Joe, to the NFC Championship game, where it's the Detroit Lions in the NFC Championship game taking on a Niners team that, as we referenced earlier in the show, didn't really look all that great against Green Bay until they had to.
The Detroit Lions are the only team, and I'm sure their fans are well aware of this, the only team in the NFC currently who's never reached the Super Bowl. There's 3 teams in the AFC who have never done it, and they won't do it this year, the Browns, Texans, and Jaguars. But the Lions are the Browns of the NFC. They are a historical franchise who had great success before the Super Bowl era, and this year have a great chance to get back. And you would think, based on how San Francisco played last week, that's a beatable team. But San Francisco escaped with the skin of its teeth and is going to be fired up to prove that, obviously, now that they're healthy in the NFC Championship game, that they're going to make it back. They're going to make it to the Super Bowl after what happened last year with their quarterbacks getting hurt against the Eagles. Jared Goff, he's 5-3 in the postseason. He had 287 yards passing last week, 2 touchdowns. That being said, he does struggle outside. He has 5 touchdowns to 4 interceptions and a 6.5 yards per attempt outdoors this year. So that is certainly something to watch in Santa Clara, California. I'm pulling up the weather right now for Santa Clara, but Jared Goff has traditionally struggled a little bit more in outdoor conditions. That being said, looks like it's going to be beautiful on Sunday in Santa Clara, so shouldn't affect Jared Goff, who is used to playing in California, of course, Southern California. Jordan Love, we just talked about him, didn't throw for 200 yards, had the couple of picks, his first picks in a long time last week, so that 49er defense was able to get after Jordan Love. Amon-Ra St. Brown last week, great game, yet again, 8 catches, the game-winning touchdowns. San Francisco deploys cover 3 and cover 4 58.8% of the time. Amon-Ra St. Brown averaged 3.5 yards per route run on a 30% target share for a league high 54.4 receiving yards per game against those coverages during the regular season. So this is a wonderful coverage matchup per fantasy points data for Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I don't have to tell you that Amon-Ra St. Brown's a good play for fantasy. He's always a good play for fantasy. But schematically, if Jared Goff can stay on his feet, looks like he's going to have a lot of success in this matchup. The 49ers, in terms of Sam Laporta, they allowed the 10th most receptions per game to tight ends this year. Sam Laporta had 9 catches after it looked like he was going to be out for the season, just 2 weeks after suffering that hyperextension in his knee. Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave combined for 6 catches and a touchdown last week. So Sam Laporta certainly looks like a good option. But Aaron Jones on the ground had a great game against them last week. Jahmyr Gibbs, to me, looks like a true difference maker. Like, he has superseded David Montgomery. I'm not saying David Montgomery's a bad player, but Jahmyr Gibbs, when the going has gotten tough for the Lions here in the playoffs, games they have to win, Jahmyr Gibbs has really become the difference maker for them.
What about Joe when the Niners have the ball?
Well, Brock Purdy has to be good. I don't know what it is, man. Look, first and foremost, credit to him at the end of the game, putting the drive together that they needed to put together. But Ross, he is a guy who you can go and find YouTube compilations of his hilarious turnovers in college. And I don't know if he paid the piper or I don't know if the football gods have considered him paying his dues for some of those turnovers. But, his turnover luck has completely fallen by the wayside. I don't think I've seen a guy throw as many interceptions that don't get intercepted as Brock Purdy. It's pretty incredible. But the credit to Brock Purdy is this. Because, you either have to be a stan or a hater in these days, right? You can't just call it down the line. But I'm going to try to call it down the middle on Brock Purdy. I think there's a lot of things he does well. I think he executes the offense well. And one term that Greg Cosell always said, and he utilized this with Eli Manning, because we know Eli, back in his day, was known for throwing some interceptions. He said Eli Manning had selective amnesia. He would forget about the interception and how it affected him mentally, but he wouldn't forget the interception and what he could learn from it. So he wouldn't be afraid to throw the football. And Brock Purdy is certainly not afraid to throw the football. Now, it helps when he has big-ass wide open windows to throw to, but if you look at the touchdown he threw to George Kittle, that was a perfect throw. It was right on the money, and it was in tight coverage. So Brock Purdy escaped with a bad game, and he's got a pretty good matchup this week against the Lions. Obviously, they picked Baker off twice, but the Lions allowed the fourth most passing yards per game to quarterbacks during the regular season. And obviously, in this postseason, they've surrendered over 700 passing yards and 5 touchdowns to Baker Mayfield and Matthew Stafford. So this is a great matchup for Brock Purdy. Debo obviously is the big question with his shoulder injury, but if not, Brandon Ayuk, look, disappointing last week, disappointing down the stretch. Brandon Ayuk has an opportunity to put up big numbers in this game.
Joe, you're the man. That was amazing. I'm stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.